Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back for day 2 of the Everything Policy program. I am honored to kick off this afternoon by introducing a former colleague and friend, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. We are so glad to have you back at Mobile World Congress this year. Now, Commissioner Carr joined the FCC over a decade ago and has dedicated his time both in the building and on the road with communications experts and with Americans around the country to better understand and advance the public interest. He is a champion of wireless innovation and competition who has worked tirelessly to identify spectrum opportunities, renew the agency's auction authority, and advance America's global leadership in 5G. He's also a strong supporter of the hardworking men and women who install the nation's communications infrastructure. And he's a compassionate advocate who led a groundbreaking telehealth initiative to help ensure that Americans in rural communities have access to high-quality health care. Now, Commissioner Carr is also the rare policymaker who is equally agile on the news show circuit and atop a communications tower. We appreciate that he is generous with his time, a careful listener, and consistently offers thoughtful insights and advice, something we look forward to today. So please join me in welcoming FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. There you go.
Thanks. Wow, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It sounded like something my mom would have written, so I really appreciate all the compliments that were in there. I got to start, obviously, with the big elephant in the room. Some really breaking news happened yesterday that really set the tech and telecom bar abuzz, particularly here, right here, actually, at this exact same area yesterday, which was my great policy advisor, Greg Watson, who now very famously, according to all the text messages I got yesterday, spoke at the panel without any socks on. So I try to sort of pride myself on very colorful socks. I think I got some tiger socks on today. And my guy Greg was like, you know what, I'm going to own and occupy the lane of no socks at all. And he's continued that today. So kudos to him on the good branding that he's doing. I also start recognizing Greg for another reason, which was he put together some very good remarks for me to give today. I read them on the plane. I even doodled on them a little bit. And I was going to talk about how I was very pleased that now 2.5 years into the Biden administration, that the administration had apparently agreed with me and with many people that a light-touch regulatory approach to broadband is the right path forward. I was looking forward to giving that speech, but apparently I got to toss that one out the window now and give a very different speech after the announcement yesterday that the FCC is going to head, apparently, back down the path of utility-style regulation of the internet. And I got to say, listen, I knew that the internet often had a lot of garbage on it, but I never really processed that we would soon regulate it like a sewer pipe at the end of the day from a regulatory perspective. That was funnier in the thinking, apparently, than the delivery there. But I will not be deterred. I will keep trying. But listen, I am surprised. We are sort of jumping back into this regulatory hot tub time machine, so to speak, and we are about to sort of head back down an exceptionally debated, backwards-looking issue area. And it's not where we need to be as a country in terms of promoting U.S. leadership in tech, in telecom. Now, I don't know how many of you remember the last time we went through this debate back in 2016. Do you remember it? 2016, 2017, raise your hand. Good. I'm glad almost all of you can remember a couple years ago, 5-6 years ago. It's really hard to describe for people that didn't live through it, the apocalyptic rhetoric that we saw back then. Literally you saw banner headlines, World War III type font on CNN saying the end of the internet as we know it. We saw tweets from political accounts that should know better saying that with this decision you would get the internet one word at a time. And now some of it was funny as well. Someone said, if we don't have net neutrality, but for net neutrality, we never would have discovered Justin Bieber because he got famous on YouTube and on videos. And at first, I had a hard time deciphering whether that was an argument for net neutrality or against net neutrality. I remember getting a Facebook message from a high school ex-girlfriend that I had broken up with. It's very clear for the story that I had broken up with. And she was messaging me and saying that I was about to make the second biggest mistake of my life by going down this path of returning to a light-touch, bipartisan framework that had governed the internet for 20 years. And of course, none of that came true. None of it came true. Quite the opposite. When we look at what has happened in America's internet infrastructure in the 5 or 6 years since 2017, I can't do the math right now on the fly, it has been quite remarkable. When we were told that it was going to result in a slowdown of the internet, let's be clear, more websites and internet traffic were slowed down by people putting up those spinning wheel screens in protest of our decision than ever happened as a result of our decision. In fact, I have here today, hot off the presses, some new latest data, speed test data from Ookla. And do you know what the difference in speed is from our 2017 decision to today? Who can guess? How many percent or fold difference in mean download speeds? Who has a guess? Who's got one? Go lower. The story works better if you're lower than that. 2x? No. Not 2x. 524% or 6x. 6x. And when you look at the actual investment in infrastructure builds that's happened in those 5 or 6 years, it has been record-breaking. Whether you look at the new small cell builds, which a lot of you know I'm very partial to, or you look at fiber, or you look at the new generation of low Earth orbit satellites that are out there, we have brought millions of Americans across the digital divide as a result of the private sector's investment because of the right regulatory framework we have. And I was surprised yesterday to read that there was some discussion about how we need to go down this Title II path because of our experience in COVID. The opposite is true. The opposite. COVID-19 was the ultimate stress test of global telecom policies. We saw in the US, we saw around the world, a massive spike in internet traffic, 30% in some cases. And what happened in the US? Our networks kept on humming. Performance stayed the same. Mobile speeds actually increased. And let's look over in Europe. Europe has a regulatory framework that is a lot closer to the type of Title II regime that we are apparently going to get here pretty soon in the US. Much more heavily regulated. No real distinction between broadband and telecom when it comes to heavy-handed regulations there. And when they saw those speed increases in Europe, the regulators there, unlike here, rightly, panicked. They called up the big streamers and they asked them to degrade the quality of their internet streams because they were worried that the continent's networks were going to break. And that's because for almost every single year, given the difference between the regulatory framework in the US that encourages investment, in Europe that does not, we have 2x, 3x, multiples investment per household, per user. And so if we want to talk about COVID-19, we should talk about the fact that it was America's internet infrastructure that outperformed everywhere else in the globe because we nailed it in 2017, and we nailed it from 96 to 2015 with a light touch regulatory framework. So I'm disappointed, although not surprised, that we're going to be heading back down this path. I think it's a mistake. And this is not just a conservative talking point that FCBA World puts up with from time to time. It's not just my word. You can look at President Obama's former top lawyers at the Department of Justice. They came out last week with a study that talked about Title II regulation bringing about a massive and transformative change in terms of the expansion of regulatory authority by the agency and the control of the government over how the internet functions. They talked about how there's been a sea change in the law since the FCC last did this in 2015, whether it's West Virginia versus EPA, the Supreme Court's adoption of the major questions doctrine. And what they said is the Supreme Court will strike down any decision. They didn't do the thing that lawyers always do, it's maybe, and people can argue both sides of it. They were definitive. And they have the standing and authority to know this. They represented the United States government in court before the Supreme Court. They know what they're talking about. And so they said, not my words, it would be folly for the FCC to do this. They said it would be a massive waste of time and resources, and that the FCC should focus instead on the policy areas, both which we have authority and jurisdiction over, and ones that are going to actually make a difference, whether it's rural broadband, whether it's spectrum, whether it's cracking down on illegal robocalls. And so we're going to head down this path, and as you guys know, it is a massive, massive consumption of resources at the FCC to do this. And ultimately, we're going to run into a dead end, and we're going to get reversed by the courts. And it's a shame that there's a lot of important things that are going to be left by the wayside that we do that. I know there's a lot of here at law firms that are probably happy we're going down this path. You're going to benefit, but I think you and a couple of fundraisers on the left are the only ones that are going to really benefit from this decision of the FCC to go back down this path. And so as a good friend of mine once said, this entire thing, Title II, is a solution in search of a problem. It's a solution that won't work to a problem that won't and doesn't exist. But there is a problem that we do have. There are lots of problems we have in tech and telecom policy. And I want to sort of focus the remainder here on one of those, which is America's leadership in wireless. America's leadership in wireless is part and parcel of our geopolitical leadership. When we lead the world in wireless, when we're freeing up spectrum, when we're putting up new towers, when we're creating jobs, the world takes notice, and they follow our lead. And very much the opposite is true when we're not leading. And right now, we're at a very serious spectrum deficit. I was sort of reminded of it this morning. We were taking off from Dulles this morning on the way here. And I don't know how many experienced this, but the pilot is accelerating. We're going through sort of acceleration speed, and then 2 or 3 minutes into the flight, they switch and say sort of throttle down a little bit, and the plane kind of lurches. And every time for a moment, I'm like, is this the end? Are we going down? Are we stalling out? I don't know if that happens to you. I'm very nervous about heights, notwithstanding the tower climbing stuff. But I think that's the type of moment that we're in right now when it comes to wireless policy. We have slowed down. We are stalling out. And the question is, are we going to re-accelerate and get going, or are we not? And the deficit is real. When you look at mid-band spectrum in particular, I know you've heard this stat probably a lot at this conference. Federal government users have about 12x the amount of spectrum that commercial has, commercial wireless. When you step back from the US and you look around the globe, we are almost 400 megahertz behind many, many other countries when it comes to the availability of mid-band spectrum. I think some studies said we rank 12 out of 15. So we are in the hole right now when it comes to spectrum. And that's a change from where we were a couple years ago. I'm biased. I was the majority. I thought we did a lot. So discount that if you want. But the facts speak for themselves. We did C-band. We did 2.5. We teed up 3.45. We did CBRS. We did 4.9. We did L-band. Some of you like that. Some of you hate it. Fine. We did L-band. We did 6 gigahertz. We were moving at a fast clip. We have throttled down. And the future doesn't necessarily look much brighter. If you look at work, which is coming up, as you all know, one of the most important sort of international conferences that are out there. And you look at China, who is already pretty far ahead of us when it comes to mid-band spectrum. Their delegation is going in pushing for 5 spectrum bands covering 1,500 megahertz of spectrum for mobile. Now, I'm not saying I agree, I don't necessarily agree with every particular spectrum band that they've picked out, but they're leading on trying to get 1,500 megahertz of spectrums that works for them, for their economy, and for their countries. In the US, we're going in pushing 2 spectrum bands, one of which we've already allocated, the other one is about 100 megahertz. So we're sitting here at a global deficit right now, and we're going into the World Radio Conference potentially falling even further behind, and some studies show that we could be behind our global counterparts by 1,200 megahertz of spectrum in the not-too-distant future. So we've got to turn things around. Back in March of 21, I put out a spectrum calendar that laid out the different ideas that we could pursue as a country to match the pace and cadence that we had been moving on when it came to spectrum. And I think one thing we could do going into work is we should be adding some more spectrum bands. We should be looking at 4 gigahertz. We should be looking at 7 or 8 gigahertz. I don't have all the answers there, but we're not leading. It sort of reminds me of a sort of a Jay Leno scene from like a late night TV show. You remember Jay Leno? Trayvon? Yeah, okay. And he said this, true story, he says, true story, we have a spectrum strategy that's been announced that's coming out at the end of this 3rd year of the Obama administration. My reaction, why rush it? Why rush it? That was also funnier in the practice round. The point is we are falling behind the pace that we need to hit on mid-band spectrum. It has a real consequence, not just for connectivity, but for America's geopolitical leadership. And I think we have to continue to talk about it from that perspective. I think this conference is an important, hopefully, turning point where we start to put a spectrum calendar out there. We at the FCC don't need to wait for the administration to put it out there. We can all put out a spectrum calendar. I've done it. And we need to continue to get moving in that direction. But these are the types of debates and issues that we should be talking about that I'm very worried that this entire backward-looking endeavor towards Title II are not just going to move to the back burner, but could very well knock off the stove entirely. But I'm hopeful that we can work together. I think as a 2-2 FCC for a record period of time, we demonstrated just that. Very early in her chairmanship, Chairwoman Rosenworcel reached out and said, let's work together. Let's find areas of common ground. I agree. That was an easy one. We're going to disagree on some things. I think net neutrality, Title II may very well, obviously, be one of those. But I'm going to keep reaching out. We're going to keep working together. And hopefully spectrum is one where we can turn the corner and keep making progress because it's so key to connectivity, to investment into the U.S. geopolitical leadership. And with that, I've gone 5 minutes over. No extra charge for that. But it's great to be with you again after a 2-year hiatus and look forward to continuing this conversation with you all. Thanks for having me. Thanks.